Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to get what you deserve in life. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my videos, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. So there I was, 35 years old, sitting in our pathetic 5-year-old sedan, while my friend Mira pulled up in her brand new Escalade. Again, the third time this month, she made me look like some broke college student picking up coffee. I'm Alaya, and I've been married to Beckett for 8 years. 8 years of watching everyone around us level up, while we stayed stuck in this middle-class purgatory he called financial responsibility. Beckett's an architect, which sounds impressive until you realize he spends more time obsessing over imaginary dream houses than actually making the money to afford a decent car. Every conversation about upgrading our lifestyle got shut down with his precious 5-year plan. This elaborate fantasy about buying land and building some custom home that would probably never happen anyway. Meanwhile, I'm driving around in a car that screams, "I settled for less." The breaking point came during one of our usual evenings. I'd spent the day scrolling through Facebook, watching Eliana from my old job post pictures from her new BMW, while Kinsley from book club shared photos of her husband surprising her with a Lexus for their anniversary. Then I come home to Beckett hunched over his drafting table, sketching away at those ridiculous house plans, like some teenager doodling in a notebook. "We need to talk about getting a new car," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Something that actually reflects where we are in life." He didn't even look up from his drawings. "We've discussed this, Alaya. The sedan runs perfectly fine. We're saving for the house. The house that exists only in your head." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of tiptoeing around his delusions. "Beckett, I'm 35 years old. I shouldn't have to explain to people why I'm driving around in something a college kid would be embarrassed by." That's when he finally turned around, and I could see that stubborn set to his jaw that I'd grown to hate. Beckett wasn't like other guys. He didn't yell or get dramatic. He just got this infuriating calm that made me feel like he was talking to a child having a tantrum. "It's not about the car, is it?" he said in that measured tone that made my skin crawl. "It's about what other people think. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm tired of looking like we're struggling when we're not. Maybe I want people to see that my husband actually values me enough to buy me something nice." He stood up then, all 6'2" of him, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. This was classic Beckett. Everything had to be analyzed and processed through his logical architect brain before he could respond like a normal human being. "We agreed on priorities, Alaya. The house fund this time, retirement savings, building something lasting instead of just spending money to impress people who don't matter." People who don't matter. I felt my voice rising. "These are my friends, Beckett. These are the people I have to face every day while you're locked away in your office, playing with your little drawings." The conversation spiraled from there, with him pulling out spreadsheets and timelines, like we were in some business meeting instead of talking about my basic needs as his wife. He showed me numbers and projections explaining how a $70,000 SUV would set back his precious house plan by 3 years. 3 years, like his fantasy was more important than my reality. That night, lying in bed next to him while he slept peacefully, I made a decision. I was done being the understanding wife who sacrificed what she wanted for some maybe someday dream. I was done being embarrassed by our lifestyle while he got to feel superior about his principles. The next morning, I started packing. Not everything, just enough for a few days at my parents' house. If Beckett wanted to prioritize his imaginary house over his actual wife, he could see how that worked out for him. My parents, David and Eliana, had always understood me better than Beckett ever did. They knew what it meant to provide for the people you love, to make sure your family never had to feel less than. When I called my mom that afternoon, she didn't hesitate. "Come home, sweetheart. Your father and I have been worried about how that man treats you." By Sunday night, I was settled into my childhood bedroom, feeling more supported than I had in months. That's when I decided to send the text that would change everything. I kept it simple and direct. No room for his usual negotiations or logical arguments. "Beckett, I'm not coming home until you buy me a new SUV. I've earned it. My parents agree. Don't call me until you're at the dealership." I hit send and felt this rush of power I hadn't experienced in years. For once, I wasn't asking or explaining or justifying. I was telling him exactly what needed to happen. His response came back almost immediately. "Understood." Just one word. No argument, no counter-proposal, no attempt to negotiate. For a moment, I felt this flicker of uncertainty. It wasn't like Beckett to give in so easily. But then, my mom brought me a cup of tea and reminded me that sometimes men need a wake-up call to remember what they have to lose. I settled in to wait confident that within a day or two, I'd have my new SUV and Beckett would have learned an important lesson about priorities. After all, what choice did he really have? The first day passed without any contact from him, which I expected. Beckett was probably sulking, trying to figure out how to spin this into another lecture about fiscal responsibility. I spent the time catching up with my parents, who were more than happy to validate my feelings about the situation. You deserve so much better than this, my mother said over breakfast. When your father and I were your age, he made sure I had everything I needed to feel valued. My dad nodded from behind his newspaper. A man who won't provide for his wife isn't much of a man at all. Their support felt amazing after years of being made to feel unreasonable for wanting basic things. But by the second day, I started getting a little impatient. Where was my call from the dealership? Where was Beckett's apology text, begging me to come look at SUVs with him? Instead, something weird happened with my phone. My Instagram kept buffering, and when I tried to watch Netflix, it kept asking me to upgrade my plan. I called Beckett, ready to ask him what was going on, but the call went straight to voicemail. Having some technical difficulties, I said to my mom. Probably just the cell tower acting up. But then my subscription box didn't arrive on Tuesday like it always did. And when I tried to log into our streaming accounts that evening, none of my passwords worked. That's strange, I muttered, trying different combinations. Maybe Beckett had updated the security settings or something. By Wednesday, I was getting seriously annoyed. My phone was basically useless, except for calls and texts. My favorite shows were locked behind password walls I couldn't access, and none of my usual deliveries were showing up. That's when it hit me. That calculating bastard hadn't given in at all. He was playing games with me. I called him again, and this time he answered on the first ring. Alaya, he said in that same calm voice that made me want to scream. What did you do to my phone, and why can't I access Netflix? Your phone works perfectly fine for calls and texts. As for the streaming services, those are luxury expenses that I've temporarily suspended while we work through our current disagreement. My voice was getting shrill, but I didn't care. This isn't a disagreement, Beckett. This is you being a controlling jerk because I asked for something reasonable. You didn't ask, Alaya. You delivered an ultimatum. I'm simply responding in kind. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice had this edge to it that I'd never heard before. You're welcome to come home anytime you'd like to have an adult conversation about our finances and priorities. But I won't be blackmailed into making a $70,000 purchase to soothe your ego. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. That night, my dad called Beckett. I sat in the living room listening to my father's side of the conversation, feeling vindicated that at least someone was willing to stand up to my husband's manipulative tactics. Michael, my dad said in his business voice, I think we need to have a man-to-man conversation about this situation. I couldn't hear Beckett's responses, but I could tell from my father's increasingly tense posture that the conversation wasn't going well. She's a sensitive woman, and she deserves to be treated with respect. My dad continued. A new car isn't unreasonable for a man in your position. The conversation went on for several more minutes, with my dad's voice getting progressively more frustrated. Finally, he hung up and turned to me with a grim expression. He's being completely unreasonable. Says he won't discuss your marriage with me, and that you have his number if you want to talk. I was furious. How dare Beckett dismiss my family like that? My parents were trying to help, and he was acting like they were interfering in something that wasn't their business. We're going over there, I announced. All three of us. If he wants to play games, we'll show him what real consequences look like. The next day, we drove to the house in my parents' car. I had my key, of course, but I wanted to make a statement. I wanted Beckett to see that I had support, that I wasn't just going to roll over and accept his financial abuse. When we pulled into the driveway, I could see his car was there. Good, no hiding in his office this time. I marched up to the front door and let myself in, my parents right behind me. Beckett, I called out. We need to talk, now. He appeared from the kitchen, and I could see him taking in the scene. Me flanked by my parents, all of us, clearly ready for a confrontation. I said I'd talk to you alone. He said, his eyes never leaving mine. Well, I don't feel comfortable being alone with you right now, I shot back. You've been hostile and manipulative, and frankly, you're scaring me. It was a low blow, and I knew it. But I was tired of him acting like he had all the power in this situation. My mother stepped forward. We're here as mediators, Beckett, to help you two work this out like adults. This isn't mediation, he said, his voice getting harder. This is an ambush. Don't be so dramatic, I snapped. We're trying to have a reasonable conversation here. He looked at all three of us for a long moment, then walked to the door and held it open. You have 60 seconds to send your parents to their car, or this conversation is over before it starts. The audacity of this man. Here I was trying to salvage our marriage, and he was giving me ultimatums. But something in his expression told me he wasn't bluffing. Reluctantly, I waved my parents toward the door. "Just wait in the car," I told them. "This won't take long." Once we were alone, I let him have it. "I cannot believe the petty childish games you're playing." I started, my voice rising with each word. "My phone, my shows, my subscription boxes. This is financial abuse." "Is it, he asked, closing the door behind him. "Or is it me refusing to fund the lifestyle of someone who abandoned our home and our marriage? You know what I make, Beckett. You're supposed to be my husband. And you're supposed to be my wife," he shot back. "The money you want to spend on that car is the same money we allocated for our house." He gestured toward his office, where I could see those stupid blueprints pinned to the wall like some shrine to his delusions. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a real bitter sound that seemed to echo in the room. "Oh, please, don't start with your silly little drawings. That ridiculous dream house was never going to happen, Beckett. It was just your hobby to keep you busy while I lived in the real world." The moment the words left my mouth, I could see something shift in his expression, but I was too angry to care. "I'm taking my things," I announced, storming toward his office. I grabbed my laptop and purse, then started shoving some of his precious architecture books into my bag. If he wanted to play games with my stuff, I could play games too. "Those are mine, Alaya," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Consider them collateral," I sneered. Then I saw those drawings on the wall, the ones he'd spent hours working on, the centerpiece of his pathetic fantasy. In a moment of pure rage, I reached up and tore the main one down. "I'll take this too," I said, starting to fold it up, "as a reminder of all your empty promises." But as I folded it, something snapped inside me. All the frustration and anger and resentment came pouring out, and I started crumpling the paper, destroying his precious work with deliberate carelessness. That's when Beckett did something I never expected. He stepped back, pulled out his phone, and dialed 911. "Yes," he said calmly, his eyes locked on mine. "I'd like to report a domestic disturbance. My estranged wife, who hasn't lived here for 2 weeks, has entered my home under false pretenses and is destroying my personal and professional property." I froze, the crumpled drawing falling from my hands. He wouldn't dare. "No, there are no weapons," he continued, "but she's acting erratically and her parents are waiting outside. I'm concerned the situation could escalate. Please send a unit to maintain order." When the police arrived 20 minutes later, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the wronged wife seeking justice. I was the hysterical woman who'd invaded her husband's home and destroyed his property. The officers were professional, but clearly skeptical of my version of events. Beckett, meanwhile, was the picture of calm rationality, explaining the situation in measured tones, while I struggled to control my emotions. "We're married," I kept saying. "This is my house, too." But when they asked for my address, I had to admit I'd been staying with my parents. When they saw the destroyed drawing and the books in my bag, their expressions grew more serious. In the end, they didn't arrest anyone, but they filed a report. A formal official record of what they called a domestic disturbance that made me look like the aggressor. After they left, I stood in the driveway, with my parents feeling like I'd just lost a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. "We're getting you a lawyer," my father said grimly. "This isn't over." But as I looked back at the house, our house, and saw Beckett watching from the window, I had the sinking feeling that maybe it was. The legal battle that followed was nothing like I expected. I thought any judge would see through Beckett's manipulative tactics and recognize that I was the victim here. Instead, I found myself painted as an unstable spouse who'd abandoned her home and made unreasonable demands. My lawyer, Timothy, was expensive but confident. He assured me that I'd get significant alimony, maybe even the house, once the court saw how Beckett had financially controlled and isolated me. The temporary hearing was my first taste of how wrong things could go. I told my story, the financial abuse, the canceled subscriptions, the way he'd cut off my access to basic necessities. But then Beckett's lawyer presented that police report along with my text message, demanding the SUV. The judge wasn't impressed with my performance. He was a practical man who seemed more interested in facts than feelings. "Mrs. Alaya," he said, looking over his glasses at me, "you chose to leave the marital home and make demands via text message, rather than attempting to resolve this through communication or counseling. But, Your Honor, he was controlling my access to luxury services and entertainment," he interrupted, "not to food, shelter, or basic necessities. In the end, he awarded me temporary spousal support, but not nearly what Timothy had promised. Worse, he made it clear that my behavior during the police incident had damaged my credibility. Perhaps both parties would benefit from individual counseling," he suggested dryly. The months that followed were a nightmare of legal fees and depositions. Every financial record had to be produced, every text message analyzed, every social media post scrutinized. That's when I made my biggest mistake. I was so angry at Beckett, so determined to show him that I could live well without him, that I started spending the support money on things I'd been denied. Nice dinners with friends, new clothes, a spa weekend with my mother. I posted about all of it on Facebook, because why shouldn't I enjoy myself? I deserve some happiness after everything he'd put me through. What I didn't realize was that Beckett's lawyer was screenshotting every single post. The final settlement conference was humiliating. Timothy had prepared me for a significant payout. Maybe not everything I'd hoped for, but enough to maintain my lifestyle while I figured out my next steps. Instead, I watched as Beckett's lawyer methodically destroyed my case. The text message ultimatum. The police report. A detailed breakdown of how I'd spent nearly $20,000 in support money on non-essential purchases. Screenshots of my social media posts showing expensive meals and shopping trips while I claimed to be financially desperate. Your Honor. Beckett's lawyer said, Mrs. Alaya isn't seeking support for legitimate needs. She's demanding funding for a lifestyle she's made no effort to contribute to or sustain independently. Timothy tried to argue, but the damage was done. The judge could see exactly what kind of person I was, and it wasn't the sympathetic victim I'd imagined myself to be. We settled. I got a few months of reduced alimony, enough to get on my feet, but nowhere near what I'd expected. We had to sell the house, and after legal fees, my share barely covered the deposit on a decent apartment. I kept thinking this was all temporary, that once the dust settled, I'd find my footing again. But the friends who'd been so supportive during the separation started fading away once they realized I couldn't keep up with their lifestyle anymore. The job I finally found wasn't the creative, fulfilling position I'd imagined. It was retail work, standing on my feet all day, dealing with customers who treated me like I was invisible. My parents, who'd spent thousands on my legal fees, suddenly became very interested in teaching me about personal responsibility. The unconditional support I'd counted on evaporated as they realized their investment hadn't paid off. 10 months after I'd sent that text message demanding my SUV and my respect, I was living alone in a cramped apartment, working a job I hated, with barely enough money to cover my basic expenses. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle or the loneliness. It was the growing realization that I'd thrown away 8 years of marriage for a car I never got and a lifestyle I couldn't maintain. I kept that crumpled drawing, the one I'd destroyed in my rage. I had it professionally flattened and framed, telling myself it was a reminder of Beckett's broken promises. But late at night, looking at those careful lines and detailed notes, I started to wonder if maybe it had been a reminder of something else entirely. Last month, I drove past the plot of land Beckett had talked about for years. There was a small house under construction there, modest but beautiful, with clean lines and thoughtful details that screamed architect designed. I sat in my used Honda, not the SUV I'd demanded, but the only car I could afford after everything fell apart, and watched workers laying the foundation. He'd done it. He'd actually built the dream house, just like he'd always said he would, and I wasn't there to see it.